We often describe enlightenment as a sudden wash of profound peace, but for most, the process looks more like a violent structural failure. It begins as a disorienting, terrifying psychological crisis. To understand why this process causes such distress, we have to look at the baseline state of the human mind. The philosopher Alan Watts called this the skin-encapsulated ego, a state where we blindly identify with the continuous stream of commentary playing inside our heads. This ego functions as a fragile framework held together by psychological attachments. You think of yourself as a solid entity, but your identity is actually a central node suspended by tension cables, tied to your job, your status, your wealth, and your relationships. Because the world is unpredictable, maintaining this artificial structure requires a massive, constant expenditure of energy. You are perpetually pulling the ropes tight to keep your sense of self stable against the flow of change. Most people only begin the journey of awakening when they are forced to. It typically takes a profound trauma, like grief or total loss, to act as bolt cutters, snapping the tethers that hold this psychological identity in place. Eckhart Tolle observed that when this structural identity can no longer bear the weight of suffering, the mind is forced to flip an internal switch. The pain felt during this collapse is the sound of your internal scaffolding giving way under the pressure. The first crack of an awakening occurs with the sudden onset of meta-awareness. For the first time, you hear the voice in your head as a separate phenomenon rather than simply being the voice yourself. This realization creates a clear division in your consciousness. If you observe your thoughts as objects, you cannot be the thoughts themselves. Once you identify as the observer, the mental narrative becomes a flickering projection, leaving a temporary void where your personality once stood. Ram Dass warned that the ego reacts to this discovery with absolute panic. It realizes it is not the true self and begins to fight for its survival against this newly discovered empty space. This early stage of awakening produces a unique form of terror, fueled by the sudden, jarring absence of the identity you once relied on to navigate the world. Because Western society lacks a context for this shift, many people assume they are experiencing a standard nervous breakdown. The psychiatrist Roberto Assagioli noted that spiritual awakenings reliably present with emotional upheavals that mimic clinical pathology, including deep depression, insomnia, and the feeling that you are no longer real. Modern scientific research provides a framework for this through the study of ego dissolution. Researchers at Binghamton University have categorized the mechanics of what happens when our ordinary first-person perspective begins to break down.
This research highlights a dual nature to the experience. It can manifest as a mystical sense of unity with the universe, or a terrifyingly isolating bad trip where you feel completely estranged from your own life. Feeling as though you are losing your mind is a standard feature of the mechanics. You are literally shedding the operating system you previously used to define your reality. The crisis begins to resolve when your internal resistance breaks. You stop trying to rebuild the old framework and permanently shift your plane of focus into witness consciousness. Sam Harris describes this as a non-dual realization. Consciousness is already free of the ego. You simply have to shift your focus to notice the spaciousness that was already there. However, a new danger arises. The dying ego attempts to survive by cloaking itself in a spiritual mask. It uses a different vocabulary, but underneath the talk of light and peace, the same rigid tethers still pull the streams. Ram Dass identified this as up-level confusion, using truths like "we are all one" to bypass basic human responsibilities and chores. Success in this journey means dwindling the ego down until it serves as a functional tool for your life, rather than its master. Surmounting the crisis of awakening leaves you with a vast, unshakable awareness. You finally access the immense energy once wasted defending an illusion.